the man who was considered one of the most intimidating arm wrestlers of all time. This man had a build and proportions that made him look almost like a comic book villain. We're talking about Richard Lupkes, also known as the scariest arm wrestler in history. His death stare was just different from other pullers, and it made him stand out in the crowd. However, despite his intimidating appearance, Richard was known for being one of the nicest and most cordial arm wrestlers on the scene. Today, we'll take a closer look at Richard Lupke's impressive career and some of the highlight moments that made him both terrifying and inspiring. Lupke stands at an intimidating 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighs over 300 pounds, with massive biceps and forearms that have earned him the nickname Leviathan. One of the most intimidating things about Lupke is his sheer size. His massive hands and arms are also a sight to behold, with biceps that measure over 22 inches in circumference. His physical stature alone is enough to intimidate most opponents before the match even begins. He began his arm wrestling career in the early 2000s and quickly gained a reputation for his dominating strength and intense focus. In 1991, he won the WAF World Arm Wrestling Championship in the 100 kilograms weight class. In 1993, he placed second in the WAF World Arm Wrestling Championship in the same weight class. In 1997, he placed third in the WAF World Arm Wrestling Championship in the super heavyweight class. In addition to his accomplishments at the World Arm Wrestling Championship, Lupke also competed in other major tournaments. He won the U.S. Arm Wrestling Championship in the super heavyweight class in 1993 and 1994. In 1995, he won the Arnold Classic Arm Wrestling Challenge in the super heavyweight class. Lupke also competed in the Ultimate Arm Wrestling League and the World Arm Wrestling League, two of the biggest professional arm wrestling leagues in the world. When Richard started arm wrestling, the sport used an entirely different table and setup than it does today. Side pressure and shoulder commitment were much more valued as they sat down at the table instead of standing up. Richard was just demolishing everyone during the era of sit-down arm wrestling. Unfortunately, there isn't much footage of Richard competing in sit-down arm wrestling, but legend has it that Richard never lost a single match. As the sport shifted to stand-up arm wrestling, Richard was still very dominant. Richard was so explosive and had so much raw power that his technique was pretty robotic and could have used quite a bit of refinement, but it didn't matter at all because Richard could have most of his opponents using just one finger. Richard was considered the guy to beat for quite some time, but there were several years where we really didn't see that much from Richard. Richard started to get back into the scene in the 2000s, and there was a moment where Richard almost became #1 in the world again. Right off the bat, Richard had a match with John Brozink, which turned into a complete war. Eventually, Richard was able to improve his position over time and get the win on John Brozink. But unfortunately, this match was right after John's match with Devon Larratt, and as we know, Devon ended up defeating John and claiming the #1 rank in the world for 2008. So if Richard had pulled John just a few months earlier, he theoretically could have been #1 in the world in 2008. However, people started to take advantage of Richard's technique, and he began to struggle as high-level technique became more and more prevalent. Richard was losing to people who he was probably far stronger than, but he just didn't have the technical ability he needed. An example of this can be seen in Richard's match versus Michael Todd. Michael used the King's move, and Richard unfortunately fell right into Michael's trap. Michael was far more efficient than Richard, meaning that Richard was gassing out way faster. Michael ended up winning this match 6-0. Another issue with Richard's technique was that he was just too nice in the setup. Richard was known for wanting the match to be as fair as possible. This does sound admirable at first, but the problem is that all of his opponents were cheating as much as they possibly could. This meant that the majority of the time, Richard ended up starting the match with a slight disadvantage. In early 2011 against Travis Bagent, we got to see a prime example of technique versus power. Richard was way bigger and stronger than Travis, but Travis still managed to put up a very good fight. In this match, we got to see one of Richard's trademark moments, the good old death stare. This match turned into a grinder, but eventually, Richard went on to defeat Travis in the match 2-1. Later that same year, Richard competed at the WAL 2011 Championships, where he faced off against a number of top-level competitors. In one match, he faced off against Don Underwood, who was known for his immense strength and technical ability. However, Richard was able to overpower Don and take the win in a very impressive showing. But despite his impressive performances, Richard's struggles with technique continued to hold him back in the sport. He faced off against a number of top-level competitors, including Devon Larratt and Michael Todd, but was never able to overcome his technical deficiencies. Another memorable match for Lupkes was against Denis Cyplenkov, a highly skilled arm wrestler from Russia. The two met at the 2011 Arnold Classic Arm Wrestling Challenge, and it was a fierce battle that lasted over 5 minutes. Lupkes ultimately emerged as the winner, much to the surprise of many in attendance. Lupkes also had many other notable victories throughout his career, including wins over Travis Bagent, Alexei Voyevoda, and Rustam Babayev, among others. His strength, technique, and tenacity made him a formidable opponent and a respected figure in the sport of arm wrestling. Despite this, Richard remained a beloved figure in the arm wrestling community, known for his friendly demeanor and humble attitude. He continued to compete at a high level for many years, even as younger, more technically proficient arm wrestlers began to emerge. In the end, Richard's legacy as the scariest arm wrestler in history is one that will always be remembered. His imposing appearance and intimidating death stare made him a figure that struck fear into the hearts of his opponents, even as his friendly personality and kind demeanor endeared him to his fans. Though he may not have been the most technically proficient arm wrestler of all time, Richard will always be remembered as one of the sport's greatest legends. In conclusion, arm wrestling is a sport that requires immense physical strength and technique. Richard Lupkes is a prime example of an arm wrestler who has mastered both aspects and has become a legend in the sport. His intimidating size and skill have made him the subject of many videos and discussions online. If you are interested in arm wrestling or just want to witness the power of the scariest arm wrestler in history, be sure to check out his matches and subscribe to our channel for more interesting content.